Hi, I'm Phil from Pens for Doodling, and I'm going to be looking at the Moonman N2. It's a tiny little pen with this funky yellow, brown and pearlescent white design. It could be the most ideal traveller's pen because it's so compact and can fit in just about any pocket, or it could be, well, awful. I'm going to take a closer look at the pen, and then I'm going to do a test doodle to see how well it performs. Is it a good pen or not? Well, we'll soon find out. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this pen. As you can see, very, very small, and the cap unscrews like so. The N2 feels good in the hand. It's very smooth acrylic, and all of the corners, even what looks like it could be quite an edge there, are smooth. There's no rough edges I can find. Even the actual pocket clip itself is bent inwards so that any potentially sharp edges you might find there just aren't any. Just unscrewing it. Even on the inside rim of the cap, there's no sharpness that I can feel with my fingertips. So it actually feels very nice to hold. Though my concern is how short the pen is. It's just literally sitting there in my hand, and that feels quite uncomfortable. But immediately, popping the cap on makes all the difference. The pen suddenly feels much more balanced. It feels pleasant to hold. The nib has the Moonman logo stamped on it, and unscrewing it, you'll find inside there is this tiny converter, and you are not going to fit much in there. You're certainly not going to fit as much as a standard short cartridge. Here's a short cartridge. If I just pull that plug all the way out, you'll see certainly not going to get anywhere near as much. So that's something you might want to bear in mind. Now fortunately, the pen takes standard international ink cartridges. So if I just take one of those and push it in. Okay, you'll see there's no problem with that going in there, and it fits quite nicely. So let's just close that up there. Okay. There we go. Now it feels like quite a dry feed, not very wet, but certainly nothing I'm worried about. I just prefer a wetter feed. Now, something that immediately jumps out to me here is how fine the lines can be. Oh dear, right. So, how fine the lines can be, or how broad. I'm not actually putting that much pressure on the nib there, so you can see there's actually quite a lot of line variance for this little pen. So I can imagine this could be actually quite good for fans of calligraphy. Now I can't do calligraphy, I'm not even going to try, but I'm just suggesting that might be a possibility. Ink flow seems good. As I say, it feels a little on the dry side, but that can actually be beneficial when you're hatching, because the last thing you want is sudden blobs of ink depositing on your page. So this actually feels quite promising. Quite a lot of feedback from the nib, you can probably hear that. Yeah, so, but it's not scratchy, there's just quite a lot of feedback. I wouldn't say it's smooth, but I wouldn't say it's scratchy either. And it may be that after a fair amount of use that might smooth out. So just going to try drawing some test squares with it, and then I'll draw something with it.
Okay, so I'm just drawing some test squares here, and as you can see the ink flow from this pen is wonderfully consistent. There's no skips or jumps, and even when I draw the lines really quickly here, you can see there still doesn't seem to be a problem with any of the ink coming out the pen. I'm impressed, to be honest. Even with squiggly lines here, the coverage is great, no problems. And then stippling, which I'm not a fan of, it's so tedious. Wasn't a problem at all here either. Ink continually being dropped on the page with each dot. I don't have the patience for stippling, if I'm truly honest, but some people like it, so I kind of have to include it in the review. But as you can see, not a single dot was missed. So here again just drew in a repeated pattern to see if there's any noticeable skips in the lines, and again it doesn't disappoint. The N2 continues to have consistent ink flow, and even here where I try mixing stippling with hatching, there's no problems at all. The N2 continues to provide ink when I need it. So let's try drawing something. Normally when I start out here, I'm not really sure what I'm going to draw, so I start mapping out some lines, try to get some shapes to start to get a feel for a scene that I'm trying to create. So here I just start to doodle random rock outlines to kind of form the idea of a cascade, and begin to block in the forms here, just quite roughly. It'll look like I'm jumping around quite a lot, but that's because at this stage I'm mapping out the forms and the ideas that are just being suggested to me as I'm drawing. So you'll see that a bush appeared there. I'm starting to draw in some pebbles before jumping back to the rocks and adding a bit more form to those. That's the joy of doodling, really. You just kind of go with the flow, see where the pen takes you. And one of the nice things I'm already discovering about drawing with the N2 is just a little bit of extra pressure makes so much difference to the depth and weight of the line. It's quite a fun pen to use. It's very comfortable, and again there's no problem at all with the actual ink flow. As you can see, it's not letting me down at all, and I didn't expect the pen to perform this well. Now I'm going to start blocking in a lot of these shadow areas here to provide more form and contrast to these rocks. Sometimes it's nice before you go into the rest of the picture to actually get a form in your mind of how strong you want the shadows to be, and so on, and to get a real feel for the actual textures that you want to carry over to the rest of the picture. This is being drawn with a Kaweco Pearl Black ink cartridge, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that earlier in the review. It's quite a nice ink to use. It's a nice black, and it flows particularly well in this pen. Generally it performs quite well in most of the pens that I've used. So here I'm blocking in the rocks on the left hand side now to start to provide a bit of shape around the cascade. So of course the water itself I'm not really going to draw too much detail in, because that's going to be the brightest part of the picture. Most of the form of the waterfall is going to be formed by the rocks around it. And here I'm just drawing in the distant trees there, so there's not a lot of detail. Otherwise the picture would get lost if I provided too much detail in the background, and I want the eye to obviously focus on the waterfall itself. So here I am blocking in the actual left hand side, adding those textures and contrast that I'd already established on the right, and you can see now the actual waterfall itself is taking form, especially after I've added some flow lines there. So here I'm just working on the foreground foliage, adding a bit more texture there, because obviously the closer it is to the eye, the more detailed it needs to be. But I'm not really going to do too much on the midground here. I'm just going to add a bit of suggestion of form. And I'm just blocking in that rock at the top there, just to make it look like a cascade is coming from, and I'm just about done. The Moonman N2 was a really fun pen to draw with, and I can really recommend it.